Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Chris Hasvold. I am the chair of the Risk Reduction Committee at the association. And normally this presentation would be exclusively for the committee, but as you will see, this is so important. We wanted to get the message out to you as quickly as possible and to as many members as possible. So we're bringing it to all of you today. I want to let you know that we are recording this. We'll get asked that question lots of times. Yes, we are recording this. As a broker who's out there working it every day like all of you, it's not always convenient to take an hour on a Tuesday morning to talk about cybercrime, but I promise you that when you see this, you will understand why it's so timely and critical to protect you and your clients. So the other reason that we're recording this is that I'm certain when you talk to others in your company or at the marketing sessions, wherever you talk to other agents, they'll want to see it as well. So we're trying to make it as convenient as possible to get you the information on your schedule. So the presentation will be available on your very own association YouTube channel by tomorrow afternoon. If you didn't know we had one, we do. The website address is nsdcrealtorstv.com. Again, that's nsdcrealtorstv.com. I'll post the link in the chat so you can click on it and save it as a bookmark. That YouTube channel is where you'll find an entire library of great webinars, including the interview we did last month with the Deputy Chief of CAL FIRE on the FHDS form. So make sure you check out that website. So let's do a little housekeeping to make sure you get as much out of this as possible. We're doing this presentation in webinar mode and not the traditional Zoom presentation, which means that you will be able to see us, but we can't see or hear you. So if you have a question, please use the chat feature, not the Q&A. And when you do, make sure you're sending your questions to everyone, not just the panelist and host. I'll be monitoring the chat so I can make sure we get as many questions answered as possible. And many times the same question is asked more than once. So if you see it's already been asked, please be patient and give our guests time to answer. And while I have you all here, you may want to mark your calendar for the new RPA training with Fred Pfister. It's a two-part training. December 14th will cover pages 1 through 6. And December 16th, we'll cover pages 7 through 16. So it's 2 parts. The classes are from 10 o'clock to 11:30. So if you want training on the entire contract, you'll need to register for both dates. And remember, as a North San Diego County Realtor member, it's free. I know CR has been charging for the training, but we're offering free to our members. And finally, I want to thank Stacy and Roxy from Ticor Title for making this happen for all of us. CR hosted this presentation a few weeks ago, and to the best of my knowledge, we are the only local association to have this, so we owe them a huge thank you. I think most of you know them, but if not, in addition to being awesome at their day job, Stacy was the MC extraordinaire at my installation dinner a couple of years ago when we were still allowed to be human beings and have a party. So thank you again, Stacy and Roxy. So again, yes, we are recording this for those of you that just joined, and please use the chat, not the Q&A, because our presenter won't be able to respond to those questions. So without further ado, Krista Christensen has worked in Fidelity Legal's department for over 13 years and has held multiple roles within the Claims and Risk Management Division. She is a regular speaker at regional and national events discussing business email compromise and wire fraud in real estate. Prior to working with Fidelity, Krista completed her undergraduate work in vocal performance at the University of Nebraska before obtaining her Master's of Music and Vocal Performance from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Krista then received her Juris Doctorate from the University of Kansas. She lives in Omaha, Nebraska with her husband and 2 kids. She enjoys singing opera, and sang the national anthem for President George Bush. So welcome, Krista, and thank you, and for taking the time to educate us today.
Thank you very much, Chris. It is a pleasure to be here with you all today. I am going to share my screen, and hopefully you all should see it now. As Chris mentioned, there's a lot of risks, a lot of things that are going on in our world. He mentioned the last time you guys could actually be in person with each other, right? Obviously, our world right now is something that most of us probably did not foresee. I'm not going to lie, I definitely didn't, right? And the 2020 in particular brought a lot of new ways to do business, a lot of ways to interact in the real estate sector. And the fraudsters took advantage of that. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is something that, quite honestly, it's been around for a while now. It really picked up, in the 2014, 2015 realm, and then just kept on increasing year after year. And that is wire fraud occurring in real estate transactions. Now, I focus on it a little different. I don't just look at wire fraud because that's the end game. That's the devastation at the end, and that's the end result. Right? So the way I look at things, if you ever want to impact the result, you have to look at the cause. And that's why my focus is on business email compromise, otherwise known as BEC. That is how the fraudsters are gaining access to our real estate transactions in order to make wire fraud occur. So what is BEC? BEC is simply a sophisticated fraud scheme that regularly targets businesses that routinely wire funds. Okay, based on that definition, you can see why us in the real estate sector are so heavily targeted. Think about how many transactions you all deal with. Think about how many wires are associated with each one of those transactions. Then think about how many transactions escrow companies deal with a month. That's why it's such heavily targeted by the fraudsters. We are a never-ending resource for them. And I want to make it clear that these fraudsters, this is their job. Okay? They're actually working together. There's multiple people. It's not just a one-person job that's saying, hey, I'm bored today. Let's see whose money I can steal. Is there 5 to 6 people that work together and all have a role that works with this fraud scheme? And how BEC happens in real estate transactions is through social engineering schemes. Okay, that's what the fraudsters are using to gain access into our transactions. Okay, typically based on FBI research, this is what happens. In a typical resale, the fraudsters first have to determine who a target is, because in every fraud scheme, you have to have a target, you have to have a victim, and you have to have co-conspirators, right? And in this case, the co-conspirators don't know what's happening. They're unknowing and unwillingly being used in this fraud scheme. Okay, so what the fraudsters first do is figure out who their target's going to be. Okay, this is what they're doing when they're trolling the internet. And unfortunately, technology has made it somewhat easier for them to do it, right? What we do, and it's important for you all to know that what you all use, the technology that you use, the social media, the networking, that is being used against you by the fraudsters. Okay, so it's just important to keep that in the top of your mind, because what they'll do is they troll the internet. They go to Zillow, Flipkey, LoopNet, Realtor.com, Zillow, all of those sites. And the reason why is because all of those sites get an IDX feed from the MLS approximately every 5 minutes. Okay, and what that feed does is give them new property listings, changes in property status, right? So it's a one-stop shop for them to figure out who they want to target. And what other information is available on those sites? Listing agents' contact information, right? And if you've been to Zillow lately, you'll see a couple property listings, and then you'll see a bunch of marketing from mortgage brokers, real estate agents, even law firms sometimes, right? All within this market. And right there, the fraudsters then know and have contact information for all of those potential targets. So then what they do then is what's called spear phishing. That is the most common social engineering scheme that the fraudsters use in our realm. Okay, and spear phishing is a targeted attack. Okay, now none of you got through 2020 without Amazon, let's be honest, right? And if you have Amazon, more than likely you have been spear phished. It is when you get that email that looks like it came from Amazon saying, we need you to click this link and update your credentials. And if you click that link, it would open up a web page that looked and mimicked Amazon's web page, and then it would ask for your login information. And if you entered that information in, what the fraudsters then do is they capture that information, they go into their account, and they spend a lot of your money, right? Well, in this scheme, the fraudsters do something similar, except what they're doing is once they determine who the target is going to be from their internet searches, they now go and Google you. They see what they can find. They search the internet. They go to your company websites. They go to your social media pages, especially if you're marketing yourself on social media. They use all of that information that's out there and they try and spearfish you. I've seen many of real estate agents who get spearfished while they're pretending to be, the fraudsters are pretending to be MLS. And they'll send an email to the agent and it'll be what's called a spoofed email. That's the mechanism that the phishing emails get sent. They send it to the intended target and they say, we need you to update your information. Please click this link. And if you click that link, the fraudsters capture all the login credentials. That's the end game of phishing emails and spear phishing emails. Okay, now spoofed emails, which is like the mechanism that is used, I equate those to imitation handbags. They look a lot like the real thing. There's just some slight variations, right? So the email that comes will mimic MLS, or they'll make you think it's MLS or another trusted contact that you have. But in fact, there'll be something wrong with it. There'll be another letter added. It'll be a different domain than it normally comes from, right? Again, the whole purpose is to try to trick you by using a trusted contact to get you to click a link or open an attachment. Okay. And once the fraudsters have that and they have your credentials, or you've opened that attachment, which is embedded with malware, which allows them access into your computing system or your email accounts, they sit and learn. Okay. They don't jump right away. They sit and figure out everyone that's involved in every single transaction that you're involved with. They'll figure out who escrow is, if there's any attorneys, who lenders are. There's mortgage brokers involved, and what everyone's role is in each one of those transactions. And then they determine who the victim is going to be. Over 70% of the time, the victim is going to be your buyer. Okay, they are the most vulnerable, the hardest to protect, and they're also the one that's always bringing in money to a closing, right? So the fraudsters then start using those spoofed email addresses and impersonate anyone and everyone in the transaction to help legitimize communications to that victim buyer, and eventually wire instructions will be provided. Those wire instructions will be to a mule account that is in some manner controlled by the fraudsters, and it's typically a domestic account, okay? But the fraudsters have some sort of control of it. Either they opened it up, through a co-conspirator themselves, or quite honestly, they just gathered the bank account information from another data theft that happened, or the account holder is actually being duped as well, a romance scheme, something of that long, along those lines. And then what they'll do is they push and push and push for confirmation that that wire has been sent to that mule account. And as soon as they receive that confirmation, they send out the wire internationally through multiple transfers. So it remains undercover and it's harder to trace. And once that happens, there is no chance of recovery. Once I first started doing this about 4 years ago, and you had about 36 to 48 hours after that initial wire was sent by the victim before the fraudsters were able to remove those funds overseas. I have seen over $300,000 gone within 3 hours of the wire being sent within the last 18 months. That's how adept the fraudsters are now. That's how quick they are at getting those funds from that mule account and sending them overseas. Okay, that is why time is of the essence, and that is why it's important for all of us to know how it can happen, what it looks like, and ways that we can try and minimize it going forward. Okay, so another thing it's important for us to realize, I mentioned that they're going to Zillow, LoopNet, they're trolling the internet. Well, they're also sending generic emails out, generic phishing emails to those within the real estate industries in hopes that someone is going to take action, click on a link, open an attachment. Remember, that's their end game. Okay. And how they get your contact information, sometimes they'll go to websites and just put everyone's, contact information in that they can find from the website. But there are marketing firms out there that gather all of your information, and then they sell it to vendors for purchasing. And what the fraudsters are doing is they are pretending to be prospective vendors with products they want to market to you all. And they are purchasing all of your contact information. And then they're sending blast emails like this out. Okay. So there's some things for you guys to recognize in generic phishing emails. One is whatever company they're purporting to be from, the sending domain does not match. Look, this purportedly come from Ticor title. You can see that in the definition where it says it's from Charlie Carr, Ticor title. But look at that sending domain. I don't know what Nippers does, but Nippers is not affiliated with Ticor title in any manner. All right, so there's your first clue. The second clue is how generic the email is. Settlement statement ready and review for review and approval. It doesn't have an order number, doesn't have an address. Very blank, very generic. That's another sign that this whatever you're looking at may be phishing. Okay. Another thing is look at the from and the to. You can see that it's from Lori's on, but it's also to Lori's on. That is a very good indicator that you are subject to a mass sending, and they've blind copied all the actual recipients. So the only thing you can see is the sender's email contact information. All right. If you see any of these types of communications, if you receive any of them, before taking any action, pick up the phone and call the purported sender. Verify that it is an actual legitimate communication before taking action. That is the biggest and best way to stop fraudsters from gaining access into our accounts and from being able to divert other people's money, is by us stopping a second and thinking before we react. Okay. Another thing that the fraudsters are doing once they gain access to an email account is setting up auto forwards. Okay. It's very important for you all to know that every single email provider you use, doesn't matter who it is, they have a rule system. Okay. There's some things that are, that are particular to rules though. One, you can't access a rule from your app on your mail app on your phone. Okay. You actually have to use a desktop and a web browser to access the rules within your email accounts. Okay. Another thing for us to remember is email rules, once they are set up, they are not deleted or edited without us manually going back into the rule system and making those adjustments. Okay, so I want us to think about that, because what the fraudsters are doing, they are gaining access into an email account. Then the first thing they are doing is setting up auto forwards within that compromised email account. So they'll set up an auto forward for all incoming and outgoing emails. Once they do that, they have complete and full access to everything in and out of that email account, and they sit and learn. Okay, they understand human tendencies. And human tendency is if we are notified of a potential compromise within the email account, the only thing we do is to change our password. Okay, well, changing your password doesn't do anything to the rule inbox. It doesn't delete any active rules. So if you go ahead and get notified of a potential email compromise, and the only thing you do is change your password, if you were the source of compromise and the fraudsters have set up this auto rule, they still have complete access. So I want to remind you, on a regular basis, check your email rules. Make sure that there is nothing there that you did not set up yourself. And if you do see something that you didn't set up yourself, that's forwarding something to an unknown email address, it should be deleted right away. And then your next action should be picking up the phone and calling all of your current clients, anyone that you're currently doing business with, and talk through a plan of how you're going to successfully finish that transaction without potential for a fraudster intervening. Okay. So I mentioned spoofed emails before, so I just want to show you some, right? It doesn't do much good to talk about it if you're not seeing it. So this is an example of a contact name spoof. This is the most common type of spoofing scheme that you will see in a real estate transaction in your communications. Okay, so what they'll do, and the reason why it's called a contact name spoof is because you can see, if you're actually looking at it on a desktop, you can actually see the spoofed email address. You can see it did not come from fnf.com, but fn-f.info. Okay, the problem is most people, especially your clients, are looking at this when they're reading emails. And the only thing that's going to show up is that escrow officer's name. That's it.
Hey, Krista, it's Stacy. Can I interject something? Because you're on a perfect screen. I just wanted to piggyback on something that you said. On here, you had talked about, a couple slides ago, you talked about picking up the phone and calling and verifying wire. And on this email here is a perfect example of why, if you don't know the phone number by heart or have it saved in your phone, Google the business, Google the escrow company. Don't go off of the phone number that they have in the emails to call the company to verify your wire instructions, because they have now set this up as evidenced by this email that you've got on the screen. The signature line has got a phone number. So if you call off of this, you're calling a false company. Is that correct?
You could be. Yes. Sometimes the fraudsters alter the phone number in the email change. Sometimes they don't take the time to do it. It just depends on the fraudster and how thorough they are. But you should never, in practice, you should never rely on a phone number that you received via email to verify anything. You should always be trying to independently verify that phone number, whether it's from the contract, whether it's from Google and looking at the business website, whether it's calling someone who has direct contact with that party and has called them before, whatever it is. But that is a very good point, Stacy. This is the problem is and I'll mention it a little later, we can't assume the communication and information we receive via email is legitimate. And this is the reason why, because it is very easy to fool us. And that's nothing against any of us. We're human. Let's be honest. We're the biggest downfall and the reason why this fraud is committed, because we're the ones that decide how we react to emails that we receive. We're the ones that decide what type of security we have on our email accounts. And we're the ones that decide what type of email service we use. And all of those are factors that can help the fraudsters gain access into our accounts. Okay. But yes, so if you see this, there's the spoofed email address that it came from. Again, on this, it's just going to show the escrow officer's name. That's it. It's a little easier for the fraudsters to hide who they are. And if you look at that courtesy copy line, the reason why it's important to say this is because it's important for you all to know that this is a way that the fraudsters try to build confidence with the intended victim, is they courtesy copy in anyone else that they think may be, critical to that victim's frame of thought before they take any action, and include them using spoofed email addresses as well. So the only legitimate email address on this entire screen is to the victim, the mortgage broker. That's it. Everyone else is a spoofed email address, and the whole purpose is for that victim to hit reply with any questions, and then the fraudster can pretend to be any of these parties to answer the questions and try and make it so that the victim is no longer has any questions or have any concerns. It's to help legitimize the communication. Okay, here's another one. This is a different type of spoofing mechanism that we are seeing more and more often, and it's called a header spoof. If you look at that upper left corner there is no way for you to tell without, just from that email that did not come from my email address. It looks legitimate, right? It says Krista.Christensen@fnf.com. Well, it must be from me, right? Look at the lower right corner. Once you hit reply, the recipient then sees, oh, no, did not actually come from fnf.com. It came from fn-f.com. Remember, one thing that the fraudsters will do through their spoofed email addresses is they will try to impersonate reputable companies' domains. And both of these examples, that's exactly what they're doing. Okay, how many of us pay attention to what email address shows up once you hit reply? Most of us don't. And again, on this, the only thing that was going to show up is my name. That's it. The fraudsters are counting on us because, let's be honest, we are creatures of habit of using the easiest thing and the easiest way to reply to communications we that we have. And what is that? To hit the reply button. So I would encourage you all to, rather than hit reply, try and change your thought process, change in how you respond to emails that you receive, and instead hit forward. I understand it'll take a little bit longer because you'll have to type back in the contact information of who you're trying to reach. But you know what it ensures? That you're actually emailing who you mean to email, right? You can't be talking to a fraudster, then you're out, you broke the chain, the cycle, right? So it doesn't matter if they've copied in the escrow officer, the attorney, anyone else, the lender, because you're going to hit forward and you're going to type back in the contact information and you're going to put in the legitimate email address for all of those parties. And by hitting send, those people are going to receive that email and they're going to go, whoa, I didn't send this email. I know nothing about this. And questions are going to be asked and the fraud may be stopped before it ever gets a chance to really start. And that's our goal. Okay, minimization is our goal because we can't eliminate it. We can't eliminate it because of the reasons why I said before. You don't control how other people respond to emails. You don't control what type of email service they use or what type of security they have. So all we can hope to do is try to put notice and give people awareness of what could happen and then try to communicate effectively throughout the transaction. Okay, because if that isn't enough, we can no longer just even rely on caller ID anymore. Okay, for those of you that are unaware, there are apps available that can spoof caller IDs. So at any time, I could call any of you and I could pretend I'm Chris. I can have his phone number appear, I can have his name appear, and I can even change my name, my voice from female to male as needed. Okay, think about the implications of that in a real estate transaction, where the likelihood that your client is going to recognize an escrow officer's name is pretty much nothing, right? The likelihood that they've talked on the phone is not very high. So it's very easy for the fraudsters to then change what started out as a phishing scheme to gain access through caller ID spoofing to now do what's called vishing. Vishing is the same concept as phishing, only it's over the phone. It's voice activated, so vishing, okay? And what we're seeing the fraudsters do is they are calling your clients, the buyers, pretending to be escrow officers. It shows up as the escrow company. It'll show up as Ticor title on their caller ID. And they'll say, this is Krista with Ticor title. I know we sent you prior wire instructions, but we're having a problem with our bank right now. So I'm going to send you new updated wire instructions that you should use for your closing funds. I'm going to go ahead and send it to you while I'm on the phone and we can verify that information. And I just need you to send that as soon as you can. Thanks. And the buyer knows no better. They don't know. They aren't familiar with the caller ID spoofing. Maybe they haven't been told that they need to verify everything independently and they need to be the one that calls. But that's what the fraudsters are doing. They're also using now what's called smishing, which is the same concept, only through text messages. It's called smishing because texting is SMS communications. So they are pretending to be notaries, you all, escrow officers, and they're sending texts to buyers asking for personal information such as copies of driver's license. But then they're also providing fraudulent wire instructions via text messages. Okay, so it's important for you all to know that this is happening so that you can communicate effectively with your clients. You all have so much contact and so much more than anyone else in the transaction that you can help provide guidance to that buyer to try and eliminate this from happening in their transaction, because this is an industry issue, right? A lot of times people say wire fraud and they think, oh, that's escrow. We don't deal with money. No, remember, this is business email compromise that's leading to wire fraud. And that makes it everyone's issue because anyone can be compromised. If the Pentagon can be compromised, you can be compromised. That's the way it is. Okay, so the more information that you can glean from the escrow companies that you do business with, the better it is for everyone, right? Find out how Ticor title provides wire instructions to your clients. Find out when that happens. Find out options for closing funds, and make sure that you communicate that often with your clients so that when the time comes and emotions are high and excitement is in the air, if they see something that's contrary to what you've told them, the light bulb goes on and they know to pick up the phone and call you or call Ticor or whatever escrow company they're doing business with directly to say, hey, I got this communication. This doesn't seem right. Okay. And why am I emphasizing this so much? It's because these headlines, they keep coming. They don't go away. The FBI anticipates this being business email compromise being a $1.6 trillion business for these fraudsters within the next couple of years. Trillion. Think about that. And yes, I called it a business because the fraudsters treat it like one. This is their 9 to 5. As you can see, it's everywhere and it's happening often. The Internet Crime Complaint Center is a division of the FBI that tracks all internet related crimes. And they come out with an annual report. It comes out about June of the following year. So 2020's report came out and it shows some I don't want to say interesting, almost disturbing information. One being that while the number of complaints dropped in 2020 from 2019, the adjusted losses went up over $200 million to 1.8 billion. And business email compromise was $1.2 billion more in losses than the next highest cybercrime. Think about that. Okay, the average net gain in a business email compromise crime is over $140,000. They don't have to get out of their house. They don't have to leave their couch if they don't want to. They don't have to wear pants, right? And they are netting this type of profit. That is why this is not going away. That is why we continually need to talk about it. And unfortunately, the real estate sector is one of the sectors that continually increases in losses every single year. There's some reasons for it. One, buyers are bringing in more money to close, right? They're borrowing less. They want to avoid the PMI. And so they're bringing in more money. Well, that's more money for the fraudsters because think about it. I said over 70% of the time in a resale, they are the target. That's a big chunk of change for them, especially in your market, right? Or if it's a cash only transaction, ooh, think about how much money that would be. Right? It's also because in 2020, the fraudsters had to switch their business model. Prior to 2020 and the pandemic, real estate agents, quite honestly, were their largest target. And it's just because of the business model. You all build your portfolio and make more contacts and have more business through strangers, quite honestly. That's how you all get contacted. I don't even want to think about how many times you get contacted a day by people that you've had no prior contact with before that say that they either want to buy a home or they want to sell a home. And that's what the fraudsters are banking on for as far as social engineering tactics. Well, 2020, with the pandemic and everything that occurred and the drop of mortgage rates, we saw a lot of refinances. So that focus changed a little bit from real estate agents and moved over to mortgage brokers who have a similar business model, right? And the fraudsters now started to really infiltrate refinance transactions, which we weren't seeing prior to 2020. Okay. And with that, really took an uptick in payoff fraud. And that is the largest increase we have seen as an industry within this fraud scheme because the buyer side's just always been high and it's going to stay high, quite honestly. But payoff fraud is where the fraudsters really have taken hold. And think about how much money some of those payoff funds represent. I mean, in your area alone, think about what that could be. And so that's why we're also seeing an increase in loss within our section. Okay. Now, I know that I've griped and I've said all these horrible things about this crime because quite honestly, it is horrible. However, the good thing about this crime is there's always ways to recognize it. They're there. We just have to look for them, right? And the first thing I want you guys all to recognize is, quite honestly, it's not if it will happen in one of your transactions, it's when. Okay, it's very important for you guys to have that thought process in your mind, because if you're thinking when instead of if, you're more likely to see red flags. Okay. Another thing is, all money's good money. The fraudsters are after it all, right? They will not turn down any money. That means they won't turn down sellers' proceeds. We're still seeing attacks on the sellers' proceeds sides. Buyer side funds, we already talked about that. Lender funds, we have seen funding lenders get attacked by fraudsters, as well as payoff funds, as I mentioned, and your commissions. They'll go after you as well. Okay, so it's important to recognize that it can happen in all facets and all areas of the closing. Okay. Another thing to know is just red flags. And it's important for you all to recognize that, hey, if you get a communication purportedly from escrow saying that they're changing their bank information, that is a red flag in of itself. Stop what you're doing. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You pick up the phone and you call the escrow company that you're doing business with and say, I just got an email saying you're changing banking information. Is that correct? Almost 100% of the time, the answer is going to be no, that's not correct. Okay. And what's important for you to do is also remind your clients of the same thing. Look, escrow companies aren't changing their wire instructions. It's painful. It's a hard process to do. So just remind everyone, so that way, if they get that communication, they think before they act. Another thing to recognize is the fraudsters understand our business. They know how busy it is at the end of the month, and they know how many closings typically happen towards the end of the week. And so they will try and use those two factors to push and push and push to get wires sent when they want them sent. So Friday before closing, before wire shut off, they'll try and get a wire out. If it's a 3-day weekend, that's really good for them because that gives them an extra day to do something. Because while the banks, the wire rooms might be closed over the weekend, if they can get that wire out on Friday, they have all weekend. And if it's a 3-day weekend, that Monday, to remove funds from that mule account and send it overseas. Okay, grammatical issues. By now we're all aware of that email that has that one paragraph that's this long. The only thing capitalized is and there's one punctuation mark, right? We all know, that doesn't seem right. But what about if you're dealing with someone where English isn't their first language? Or, maybe it's someone who does shorthand in their email because they're used to texting. And all of a sudden you get an email that looks like an English professor wrote it. That's also a red flag. It's important for us to know that fraudsters are copy and pasting communications from other transactions and insert them into yours. Okay, so whenever you see something that just doesn't seem right, trust yourself. Pick up the phone and call the purported sender using a known trusted number before you just say, okay, well, things must have changed. Because that's what they're banking on. They're also trying to pressure your buyers and your clients to take action really quickly. So remind them of a timeline. Let them know what to expect from the escrow companies you're doing business with, so they won't be caught like that, or the deer or the headlights, thinking that they have to wire funds right then, that day. Otherwise, their transaction is over. Okay. It's important for you guys to know that the fraudsters are highly aggressive. And I like this email because it just kind of shows how aggressive fraudsters can be. So this email is in response to a fraudster reaching out to a buyer pretending to be escrow, saying that closing funds need to be wired that day to avoid a closing delay. The buyer then responds back to the email because, unknowns to the fraudster, the escrow officer and the buyer had just talked the prior day, and they had talked about the fact the buyer was going to bring in a cashier's check. And in fact, the buyer had just gotten back from getting a cashier's check from the bank when they saw this email. So the buyer responded back and said, I thought I was doing a cashier's check. This is the fraudster's response to that email. Look at how aggressive it is. Basically, it's all caps, bold. They are yelling through email at the buyer, trying to get them to take action, and the action that they want them to take. So think about how easy it would be as a buyer who hadn't had that conversation, who didn't know what escrow was expecting or the timing of things. Think about how they could have responded to this email. More than likely, they would have been like, oh my gosh, I have to get something done. I have to do this. I can't lose this property. especially in today's market, right? But it's also unfortunate. Fraudsters are using COVID as well, and that's something for you all to know. COVID has disrupted so much of our lives that fraudsters figured out by now that, hey, they can just say, due to COVID, we're changing something, and no one questions anything. So what they're doing is saying that funds need to be sent earlier, and they're saying that funds must be in the form of wire so that we can avoid transfer of documents and paper during closing. So this is an email that we saw right at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Then this is one that I see about 5 to 10 times a week. Very generic, just says due to COVID, all funds should be wired. Grammatical issues. Look at the generic email accounts used for both the escrow officer and the real estate agent. These are just holding accounts, basically. But this email right here, you would not believe how many times buyers respond back, get fraudulent wire instructions, and then send money to that fraudulent account. This is all it takes. So that's why it's important for you all to know how the escrow companies that you're doing business with, how they send out wire instructions, what are their procedures on timing, how wire instructions closing funds can be provided. In your state, there's no regulation saying that it can't be a cashier's check. You just have to know what timing it needs to be so that it can constitute good funds at the time of closing. Okay, here's another example. As I said, exact same email, different date, different email addresses using. It's again showing how fraudsters are using the same communications and sharing it to say what works and what doesn't. This is an example of what you might see from someone impersonating the escrow officer. This email gets sent a lot to real estate agents trying to get buyers' contact information because the fraudster doesn't currently have it. Maybe it's because someone on the seller side is a source of compromise, or maybe it's because it hasn't been, shared via email. And this is an attempt for the fraudster to gain this information. And if provided, the buyer would receive an email purportedly from the escrow officer shortly thereafter, which would eventually lead to fraudulent wire instructions being sent. This is an email that your buyers might see, your clients. An email, highly generic. Remember, all the fraudster needs to know is that a transaction is happening and the general timing of it to send out this email. And they can impersonate anyone. In this case, the buyer then responded to the email. Hey, do I send it to the same ones as the EMD? No. I need it needs to go to a different account, which makes no sense, right? But if buyers haven't been told that, they don't know any better. Right? So if you look at the email, it doesn't make sense really. Why do I need to bring my checkbook to get a difference at closing? Why couldn't you just write me a check if there's a difference at closing? Doesn't really make sense. It makes you ask questions, right? So we need to remind people that if there's questions, stop, pick up the phone, call the sender using a known trusted number rather than just taking action. Here's another attempt. Tending to be, look at how they spell professional wrong, right? That's the spoofed email address. Just change one little letter. We see what we want to see, right? Because we skim, we don't read. Then what you couldn't see from the original email is that the fraudster also courtesy copied the real estate agent and spoofed his email address as well. And then the fraudster then impersonated the real estate agent, once again, trying to legitimize the communication and keep it all within the same email chain. And then finally, the buyers pop in and say, well, I'm out of town, but why do we need the funds so early? Notice the fraudsters bypassed that question about needing it early and just said, oh, Wednesday's fine when you get back. And then without any further prodding, the fraudster then sends another email on Wednesday, and sometime between then received a copy of the CD so that they can get the final closing figures and sent this to the buyer. That's what it looks like from your client's perspective. And that's why you aren't getting phone calls. That's why you aren't getting questions, because they think you're already involved in the communication. Here's another one where they'll pretend to be the real estate agent. to get buyers to wire funds. That's why it's important for you to know Ticor title, maybe other escrow companies you do. We will never provide you wire instructions for your clients. And it's not because we're trying to take you out of the transaction. We are trying to direct it exclusively to your client so that they have that direct contact to us to verify information. So that way, if you know right away, you're saying, oh, Ticor title is your escrow company, I will never receive wire instructions. So you will never receive an email from me with wire instructions for Ticor. If you do, you should stop right away and pick up the phone. It's an absolute. Any absolute we can provide helps everyone involved. Okay, so then what can we do about this? How can we minimize it? Right, that's our end game. How can we stop our clients and our consumers from falling victim to this crime? The biggest defense we have is education. I've stressed it throughout this entire transaction, this presentation. Talk to your clients about expectations. Let them know how a closing works. Remember, this is your business, right? This is a one-off for them. Might be the first time they've purchased a house. The last time may have been over a decade ago. Things have changed a lot. Make sure they understand what's going on. And stop assuming emails are legitimate. It goes all the way around, but especially in real estate transactions, let's be honest, we don't trust anyone at all anymore in society, but we have no problem just believing emails from people that we barely know asking for life savings as it relates to a real estate transaction. We're like, oh, that must be good. I'll go ahead and send that. It's only taken me 15 years to get that much money. So as soon as you change your thought process and assume things are not legitimate, we start reading, we start recognizing those red flags. We start taking a little bit more time, and time is all we need to process it and say something doesn't feel right. Okay. Whenever possible, communicate outside of email communications. Now, I know that it's a digital age. I know that we're pushing, digital products down. We're saying, no, we have this digital opening package now. We have this, we have that. Well, yeah, but it's still a personal transaction for the buyers and sellers. Not only that, you can explain a lot more via phone conversations. So take those opportunities whenever they arise. Also, limit transmission to people that really need the information, because it's not necessarily sensitive information or PII that the fraudsters are using. It's really just the timing of the transaction itself and little details about the transaction that the fraudsters are using to try and, defraud people. So the more we can limit that and just make it to the people that really need that information, the fraudsters may get confused, right? Make sure that you are working with IT professionals, whether it's with your own brokerage firm, whether it's your independent IT department. Make sure that you are patching and updating both your systems, all your antivirus, your malware devices, everything. Make sure that you are updating anytime you get a critical update on your phone. Make sure you're patching it. Make sure you're updating it. Okay? Make sure you have two-factor authentication for your email accounts. I would encourage you every 6 months to Google what the current password recommendations are from cybersecurity experts and see what they recommend, because quite honestly, it changes. We're reactive in this scene, right? The fraudsters do something, then we react. The fraudsters do something else, then we react. So see what the experts are suggesting for you to do for your password so that you're up to date. Be wary of free Wi-Fi. Understand that there's a man in the middle that can happen. Think of it as a filter that just comes right on top of whatever free Wi-Fi you're using and captures all your data that you're using. Think about the fact of your Bluetooth or your Wi-Fi. If you don't need it and you go into a place that has it, turn it off. Make it so that fraudsters have a much more difficult time to access your information and your data. Okay, remember, while most of our fraudsters and our schemes are in other countries, there's some domestic as well. So they could be sitting one table over from you. Avoid sending confidential or sensitive information via email, standard email. If you don't have the ability to send things encrypted, you shouldn't have that information in your inbox. In this day and age, that information is tantamount to someone's identity. Okay, make sure you're providing the title and escrow companies that you do business with trusted known telephone numbers for your clients in transactions, right? And do it on the front end when you're placing the order. That way they can effectively communicate any procedures that are intended to protect your clients. I mentioned forward rather than reply also, previously. Think about passwords, passphrases, things that you can do to try and get around caller ID spoofing, right? Don't make it something that you've come up with via email or something like that. And I encourage you not to make it something related to the transaction, but something like, what color is my shirt? My shirt is pink. Question and answer type thing that's completely off the wall, something that no one would think of, but something that way everyone knows that, hey, that person is really who they say they are. So I feel free now divulging sensitive information over phones or verifying information over phones. Okay. Reminder that, and this is a little bit more difficult for you all based on your business model. It's really easy for me to sit here and say, well, delete all unsolicited emails. But then you'd be like, well, that could be a prospective new client. I can't do that, right? And you're very right. It's a lot easier for me to say because my business model is different than yours. But what I do encourage you to think about is before you click a link or open an attachment from an unknown, unsolicited email, communicate back and forth to legitimize and make sure that that person is really who they say they are. Because FBI has warned that what the fraudsters are doing is they're pretending to be your prospective clients and they're sending you guys emails with PDFs that are embedded with malware. And as soon as you open that PDF, boom, your system is embedded with malware. Okay, so maybe go ahead and say, I see that you're interested in selling this property. Can you give me the property address? I like to do my own individual research before I look at anything that you may have gathered. Engage communication back and forth. If it's a fraudster, eventually they'll go away because they're bored. They want quick and easy. They don't want someone who's questioning them. Okay. Regularly purge your emails. If you do need to keep emails for regulatory purposes, make sure you do it in the cloud. Don't keep it in your inbox. Right? Never trust wire instructions sent via email. If you receive wire instructions from whatever escrow company you are doing business with, you make sure that you pick up the phone and verbally verify those instructions before you forward on to your client. And then once you do that, you remind your client they never wire funds without picking up the phone, using a known trusted phone number and calling to verify that bank information before that wire is sent. If you don't currently have something like this included in your email tagline, I encourage you to think about it. When these diversions are occurring, litigation is ensuing. Everyone gets sued, and there's two basic arguments that are done. One is duty to warn. Therefore, the more we can do as an industry to say we have tried to make consumers aware of this risk and protect them, the better everyone is involved. So I encourage you to put some sort of wire fraud advisory notice on your signature line. Put it above your name, not below it. You're lucky if people read to your name, they're not going under it. Okay, and I also encourage you to use bullet points, not sentences, because it's more likely people are going to read them. It's just a fact. Okay, remember that Ticor title has the following forms that are included and provided exclusively. The one on the left is provided exclusively to buyers, and we provide it directly to buyers in a secure manner. It might be through our In Here portal, which is our new digital portal, or it could be through a secure email communication, depending on the office that you use. Okay, this talks about the wire fraud. It gives our wire instructions. It says they're never going to change. And there's a place to acknowledge. Okay, the one on the right is something that's available in all of our offices, and you can use and provide it to customers. The whole purpose, again, is to give another notice. Hey, consumers, this is happening. Here's a place that you can write known trusted phone numbers on it, so you can rely on this for any calls that you need to make to verify rather than any email communications. Okay. Mentioned this before, the Start In Here, that is our digital opening package. Stacy, as well as any of your Ticor title reps, would be more than happy to talk to you about this. But what I do like about this product is it gets wire instructions out of email, because your client would use a secure portal that they will log into through a web page. There's also an app for your phone, and it would provide the wire instructions through that portal or app rather than email communications. And anytime we can do that, it helps control, it helps affect what the fraudsters have access to, but then it also is another absolute. Hey, if you use Ticor title, we're going to use Start In Here. Your client's never going to get wire instructions via email. So it's another absolute that you can provide to your clients. Reminder of social media, and that the fraudsters are using it against you, right? So what a lot of real estate agents do, what I call Insta Marketing. And that is when they go ahead and tag their buyer when they're getting ready to do a final walkthrough, or maybe when they sign the contract, something along those lines. Well, remember, a lot of times, since that's your marketing tool, that's open to the fraudsters. And now they see that and they know who your buyer is. They know who you are. More than likely, it's not hard for them to find out who the closing is being handled, especially depending on your region, how that's updated in your systems. And now they know when to strike. So what I encourage people to do is, look, we don't want to stop you from marketing yourself. We want you to be as successful as you can be, but maybe wait until a transaction is done before you post that. Wait until all the money is where it's supposed to be and all the deeds have been filed before you go ahead and say, look at how great I am. I was able to provide this for my client. You could be next. Remember that they go to your company websites. They'll use that information to try and dupe you or to gain access into your email accounts. And remember, out of office details will be used, again, by the fraudsters. Okay, it's unfortunate, but when they see that someone's out of the office because they got a bounce back from whoever they compromised, they'll see an email that says, oh, this so-and-so is out of the office until this time. That's a great time for them to pretend to be that person. So if you ever receive, an out of office from an escrow officer, and then you receive an email from that same party, maybe the next day, maybe do something, try and remind yourself, wait, I shouldn't be getting an email from Krista there. Because any little bit we can do to try and recognize the fraud before it gets to that end game is helpful to everyone involved. The sooner that we can provide notice of a compromise, the sooner we can stop someone from becoming a victim. And now, with that being said, if one of your clients does become a victim, it is very important for you to understand the steps that you should take. The very first thing that your client should do is contact their banking institution and issue a recall due to fraud. That is the very first thing that should be happening. When they're talking to their banking institution, have them ask to reach out to the recipient bank institution and request a freeze of that recipient account pending that recall request. Okay. In addition, then you should notify the escrow company you're doing business with. Let them know. One, because they may have contacts. If you're dealing with Ticor, you're dealing with a parent company that's a Fortune 500 company. We have a lot of banking contacts. If you let us know, we can also attempt to reach out to that receiving bank to request a freeze pending that recall request due to fraud. Okay. Then the victim should file a complaint with the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is www.ic3.gov, and should also then take that to the local authorities, whether it be the local FBI field office, Secret Service office, or even the police department. And the reason being is that website and submitting it through there, that's really just an intake system. They push it off to the field office that's responsible for it, but you won't get the victim won't get a response. So sometimes it's better just to get it in front of someone. Okay. Alta actually has a rapid response plan for wire fraud incidences on its website. It's free to anyone. You don't have to be a member. So go ahead and go to that alta.org website and just click search for rapid response plan. And I encourage you to keep it with you, because when something like this happens, emotions are high, people forget what they're supposed to do. So it's nice to have a little guide to walk you through, because time is important. That being said, I want to thank you all for your time. And I want to remind you all that Wire Safe is our educational motto, and that's inquire before you wire. As I mentioned before, there's two things that plaintiffs' counsel like to do. One is duty to warn. The second is they like to find out and blame the compromised party that let the fraudsters in. And that is why this is an industry issue. And I want to bring up a story that it's not a good story, but I think it's an important story for you all to know. There was litigation in Kansas in 2017. It's entitled Bain, that's B-A-I-N, versus Platinum Realty. In that case, the buyer, Bain, received an email from the listing agent with wire instructions purportedly from the title company. The buyer relied on those funds, that email and those instructions, and wired $197,000 out. By the time the fraud was discovered, all the money was gone. So Bain sued everyone involved in the transaction. The title company and lender, they settled out of court. However, the real estate agent who owned her own brokerage firm, she took it to jury trial. During discovery, it was discovered that the real estate agent's, that listing agent's email was compromised. That's how the fraudster knew about the transaction, and that is how they communicated with the buyer. Based on that, the jury held the real estate agent and her firm 85% liable for the buyer's loss. Now, granted, this is Kansas, right? Housing market is nowhere near what your housing market is. Think if any of you got dealt that hand and was found 85% liable for a buyer's loss due to you being the source of compromise. Think about the impact that would have on you financially. That is why I want to stress and remind you all that this is an industry issue, and we should all work together and communicate effectively to try and minimize the effects of wire fraud in real estate.
And Krista, make sure you let them, that agent had no idea that they were compromised.
No.
Completely
None.
Unaware of it.
Didn't know until discovery actually showed it, until analysis was done. That is another reason why when you are notified of a compromise, one of the very first things you should do is contact whoever does your IT, whether it's with your firm or an independent company, and have a complete security review done of your email accounts and your systems to verify that you aren't where the fraudster came in from.
And just a couple of things I want to bring up is, you know, I harp on my guys all the time about complicated, sophisticated passwords. And while that's really important, you can have the best password in the world. However, if you open links that are sent to your email, it bypasses all of that. So you have
You're
to be
correct
diligent about that.
Yeah, and not only that, and that's why I say humans are the weak link. We're the one. You could have the most robust IT department in the world, and you could have the most robust procedures in place for us, but we are still the ones that take actions that end up putting other people or our own systems at risk. And it's just understanding that and thinking before acting that helps try to minimize that. And anytime that you think that you got something that seems suspicious, or that you clicked on something that maybe you shouldn't, I encourage you right away, go to your IT. Let them know, have them do a look. It's better to be safe than sorry.
And this really is personal to me. I have an escrow company, and last year we were almost hacked for about $850,000 because it's real easy to go create a domain that looks almost identical to ours, right? Ours is villageescrowservices.com. Well, someone created a domain, and there was an extra I in services. And they sent out a Gmail account. They copied our logos, they copied everything. And if it wasn't for my escrow officer just catching out of the corner of her eye, wait a minute, that looks odd. Services with two I's. If that had just gone through, we would have lost $850,000 in that transaction. So yep. It's out there. It's real. I mean, it almost got us. And unless you're really paying attention.
It is. And you, unfortunately, I'm not going to lie. If there's not a day go by that I don't get noticed that someone lost money due to this fraud scheme. And it's very disheartening and it's very sad. So the most we can do, the more we can do to make sure that we know what we're dealing with and we understand the procedures that the escrow companies that we do business with, we understand how they communicate, what their requirements are, what their procedures are, and then we effectively communicate that with consumers. That helps everyone.
And we can't just rely on that CAR form that says wire fraud's an issue. We have to talk about it. And the point you made is a really good one, which is no escrow company is ever going to change wiring instructions in the middle of a transaction. So if you just have that discussion with your client ahead of time, how important it is, and if it's anything to do with that, make sure you have that contact, because these guys are sophisticated. There's a lot of money involved. And this isn't, as you mentioned, Johnny sitting in the basement with his laptop and he's bored. This is high paid hackers doing this 24/7 because there's a big prize out there, and we're the target.
You are correct. That it's unfortunate, but like I said, it's not going away. And I think that's the most disheartening part of it. So it's something that we're all going to have to deal with, and we're all going to have to remember and keep on the forefront of our mind. I understand that 2020 especially brought a lot of new worries and new thoughts into our head. I never thought that I would have to worry about teaching my kindergartner from my house while I was also trying to work from my house. It's very easy when we get caught up in all of that and the changes that we kind of forget about cybersecurity and the risks that are associated with it. But we need to try to remember to constantly talk about it. And that's what I encourage all of you to do in your monthly meetings. Make sure that you are talking about cybersecurity. Make sure you're talking about phishing emails, things of that. Don't just send out a newsletter and say, hey, you guys should be aware of this. Regularly talk about it so that everyone knows how to respond to it and everyone is aware of what others have seen.
So a couple of things. One, if you guys have any questions, make sure you use the chat, right? Ask a question there. Rick Hagan had sent a question. He said, I've seen my iPhone update a legitimate email address in my address book with an illegitimate email address by asking if I wanted to update the contact info. I mean, that stuff happens, right? It's there. And you mentioned it in the previous presentation. I didn't hear it here. About once a month, one of my agents sends me a text and says, hey, I understand you're having some trouble and you want me to go buy you some gift cards or whatever, right? It's the boss scam.
The boss scam, the boss scam, yes.
I finally told my guys, I said, look, I will never, ever, ever ask you to do that. So if you get it, obviously it's not my phone number. It's not for me. Just ignore it.
Yes, so that the boss scam is a big issue. And that's this is mainly when the fraudsters are using your company websites against you. So what they'll do is they'll go and they'll see the organizational breakdown within your website. And then the fraudsters pretend to be someone high in the hierarchy. And they'll send an email to someone that reports to that person and say, look, this is a surprise. I need you to do me a favor. I need you to purchase a whole bunch of either Google Play cards or iTunes gift cards. It's for the employees. And especially now with the holidays coming on, you're going to see this more and more. And they'll say, yes, go ahead and purchase. Typically they start with about $500 worth, but they could try for more. And then they'll say, all right, once you purchase them, scratch off the back, take a picture of all of them and send it to me so that I can provide it to the company and the employee. Don't tell anyone. And people are falling for this to the point so much that the New York general attorney actually had to put out a notice to warn people about this fraud scheme. So just be aware that this may happen, especially to you all as the holiday seasons are coming on.
Yeah, and it literally once a month for probably the last 6 months, it's happened to, as a broker, it's happened to me. And I've just told them, look, it's not me. Don't even have to worry about it, right? Just ignore it. Because people think that texting is safe. And you mentioned it earlier that I get text as well, it says from a buyer, hey, I'm interested in this property. And there's a link there to click on that property. And as agents, we think, oh, this is great. I have a potential buyer. You click on that link, your cell phone is not safe. Correct.
Texting is actually unsecure communication. There's no encryption, no sort of protection via texting. And even a lot of now, secure communications aren't necessarily, it's important for us to realize that when you send something securely, the whole goal is to start at point A and get to point B without anyone impacting it in between. Right? That's the goal of secure communications. But if point B is already compromised, the fraudster has complete access and can manipulate that communication once it's hit its end. So that's an important distinction for us all to remember, because a lot of times I see people say, oh, well, it says that it was sent securely via Zix, so it must be secure then. It's like, no, that means that it started and ended without being compromised. It doesn't mean that it started from a legitimate site. It doesn't mean that it hasn't since been altered since it's been in your inbox. So that's an important thing for us all to remember.
And a question just came in, Krista, that I'm not sure that you can answer, but it's one that I hear all the time as well. It says, are wire fraud losses typically covered by E&O insurance?
This is a difficult question because it depends on your policies, but typically no. Typically, this is where wire fraud is a little different because it depends on, first off, it depends on what type of your standard E&O policy, more than likely not. However, there's other types of insurance policies that are out there now that are cyber related. You have a cyber crime policy. You'll have a social engineering policy. There's a lot of different variations. And so it really depends on the facts of that matter. Who was compromised? Who wasn't? Did you rely on a social engineering, a social engineered email, and that's what made you act? Well, then that wouldn't necessarily be covered by a crime policy. In fact, that actually happened to a law firm in Virginia where their normal E&O did not cover it. They wired funds out in response to a spoofed email that they received pretending to be from one of their vendors, right? Once they realized the fraud happened, they filed a complaint. They filed a claim with their crime policy provider, and it got denied. And the reason why it got denied is because in the exclusions, it said it had an exclusion for any voluntary release of funds. And the way that that was deemed is they voluntarily wired those funds out. It wasn't like a criminal came and got access to their bank account and pulled the funds. They voluntarily wired the funds in response to a spoofed email. And they took it to trial. They sued and said that they were being for bad faith. And the court found in the insurance carrier's favor and said, there are many different policies out there. The crime policy has a narrow coverage. This is outside the coverage. That should have been a social engineering coverage, which you didn't have. So it's really important for you to know what coverages you have. Another thing to think about is whether or not your insurance is your brokerage firm covers any loss for any potential compromise situation if you are not using the brokerage firm's email account. That is something for you to think about, because a lot of times that insurance policy only covers people actually using the brokerage's actual email account. It does not cover, their contract workers who are using their own individualized email account.
So Glenn, I think the answer to your question is probably not, but it's really good to start the discussion, right? I mean, the first part of this is becoming aware that there's an issue and how we address it, and have the discussion with your broker or your insurance company or whoever, and start asking the questions. Is it covered? What do I need to have for coverage of this? Correct.
And understand that, quite honestly, in this realm, you're never going to have 100% coverage. I think as of right now, in cyber coverage is pretty much maxing out at about 250. That's it.
That's actually the quote I was given from my company, is a 250. We've got $1 million policy, but only 250 for that. So in our transactions here, if it's a $2 million transaction, which is not uncommon, and that gets sent overseas, it's nice that 250 is excluded, but you're still responsible for 85% of the rest.
Correct.
That's scary.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. I don't see any more questions in here. So, again, huge thank you to Stacy and Roxy for pulling some strings to get Krista here for us. I think you understand now the significance of this. When you don't even know that you're compromised and you're still found liable for losses, that's should get your attention, hopefully. Thank you to Shirley again for always arranging the best training for our members. Remember, guys, nsdcrealtortv.com. That's where you'll find this and other webinars. And remember, mark your calendars for the new RPA training with Fred Pfister, who is our association attorney, December 14th and 16th from 10 o'clock to 11:30. And again, thank you, Krista. I really appreciate the time. Great information. And one more came in. Let me see. Oh, sorry, got the wrong one. Okay, I think that's it.
All right. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. And you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Krista. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, guys.